Welcome home. We are WNST. Towson, Baltimore. Baltimore positive. We're positively into the 4th of July, and the Orioles are out on the West Coast, but they'll be back on the East Coast next weekend. We will be down at Fadley's in Lexington Market. Luke and I will be getting together, as well as probably some Yankees fans as well, not too far from the Casa de Bambino. Maybe you and I should do a little private tour of the Babe Ruth Museum. The Yankees fans will be in next weekend. Orioles fans will be downtown. It'll be the 12th. We will be there giving away the Gold Rush Sevens doublers, where the top prize is $10,000. Did have a $20 winner 2 weeks ago at Coco's. Some folks win. I'm convinced they win. They go out the door. They don't tell me how much money they've won. But if you win down at Fadley's, come down. We'll get a picture taken with you and get you some shrimp salad, a delicious crab cake. We'll be at Fadley's on the 12th. It's all brought to you by our friends at Liberty Pure Solutions, keeping our water crystal clear, as well as our friends at Jiffy Lube Multi-Care. You hear about them all the time here during these wise conversations. I feel really bad. I shattered my cold roofing mug, so I am drinking my Royal Farms now out of a Dundalk mug with East Point Mall on it, the Battle of Battle Grove. Luke, I'm going to need some coffee for you and I to get together early on the 4th of July and the 5th of July and into the weekend. I wanted to take you out to Oakland, dude. I thought for a minute, like, we should go out to San Francisco. We should drink proper tequila, on the anniversary of our country's declaration of freedom. And we should be free to go watch baseball with like a couple hundred friends and family this weekend in Oakland.
Yeah. I mean, the Coliseum in all its glory and something, but it's always strange when the Orioles go out to the West Coast. And obviously in the years where they haven't been as good, which has been more often than not over the last 30 plus years, they're they're completely forgotten about, but obviously a different scenario now and an opportunity to first go out to Seattle, where you're going to face some good pitching. I mean, the Mariners pitch. They pitch at a very high level. You look at the three starters that the Orioles are in line to see: George Kirby, Logan Gilbert, Bryce Miller, all have good numbers. I mean, the worst ERA out of that trio is 3.88. Problem for the Mariners is they don't score any runs. I mean, one of the worst offenses in baseball, and they've been to this point the class of the AL West, but Houston is coming, as the Orioles found out in painful fashion a couple weekends ago, as the Astros are really surging. I mean, the Rangers, they beat the Orioles Sunday night, but it's certainly not looking great for them. But Seattle, I mean, they pitch, but you almost feel like if the Orioles and the Mariners joined forces, my goodness, what a super team you would have there in terms of the bats and then on the pitching side. But this is an opportunity for the Orioles to go out to the West Coast, understanding there's not quite as much of a microscope as they've been under the last few weeks with some of the tough matchups they've faced, tough series they've played, and to go out there and win a series and then go to Oakland, which, earlier on this season, the A's were playing, I don't know if admirable is the right way, or the right description, considering all the circumstances there. But, you look at them now and they're playing 350 ball, shouldn't have any problem there. So this is a week where you want to go out to the West Coast and you understand that you might need to bring your own energy, so to speak, especially in Oakland at the Coliseum, but it should be an opportunity for the Orioles to win some ball games. And as we've been talking about this AL East race, where Orioles Yankees neck and neck, literally tied for first place at the end of Sunday night, although the Orioles ahead percentage points wise. So you want to go out to the West Coast and keep things going. This team's played good baseball on the road. They played good baseball just about anywhere other than Houston for a long time now. So you want to keep that going. But this, like I said, this is a Mariners team that you better bring the bats that were so red hot in June. You want that to continue into July. But this is also a team that, because we've talked about the Orioles' challenges with their pitching, once you get beyond Burns and Grayson Rodriguez, and we'll see where Burns fits in. He was on the paternity list this weekend, and I assume we're going to see him for one of these two last games of the Seattle series. But for anyone that's taken the mound, this is a Seattle team that even some of the names you recognize, like a Julio Rodriguez, for example, they're just not hitting. I mean, again, kind of crazy to think about a team that is 8 over 500 and has a multi-game lead in the AL West, but they're one of the worst offenses in baseball. So that's where it's tough to look at the Mariners and say, are they going to be able to hold off the Astros the way this thing's going? Because they need offense in the worst way.
Well, I was going to reach to my boy Dave Sims and see if he'd come on a little bit, or I can reach to Maury Brown out in Seattle and talk about the Mariners and Larry Stone, people I've had on for years and years and years talking about the Mariners. And I had Daryl Ryder on last week and Munch Bishop when we were playing the Guardians. I'm going to make that mistake. And I said the R word to somebody the other day about the Washington football team in regard to Hootie and the Blowfish. So, but the Mariners, I could still say that, or the M's. I mean, I go back to Bruce Bochy and Rupert Jones, right? Like, so I look at this and A-Rod and Ken Griffey and all they've had. They're another place that, like, you and I in a previous conversation said, are the Orioles going to grow up and be like the Cardinals? Or are they going to grow up and be like the Rays? We don't think they'll be like the Phillies because they won't have that sort of revenue. But where will the Rubenstein Orioles fit in payroll wise, philosophically? I mean, the Mariners shopped in Asia before anybody did, and certainly Ichiro. How could I not mention Ichiro when I talk about the Mariners? But they've had parades there for the football team, and even before that, the Supersonics, who've now left them, and the Kraken are cracking it there. But the Mariners are an interesting franchise in that way that, to your point, we play them a couple times. They feel like they play on Mars, right? Like not just all the West Coast teams, but it feels like more about the Angels. The A's are in the news for their awfulness. And I had a guy in the beer garden ask me about two things: pitching and whether the A's were actually going to Vegas or not. And I don't, the Mariners go to sleep and you don't feel them. And then you look up, you're like, they're in first place. They never really win. I mean, they've had years where they've been incredible during my lifetime, winning, 115 games or whatever crazy stuff was years ago. But they're perennially trying, much like maybe like the Rangers before they won last year, sort of on the cusp of, well, maybe this will be their year, and they have a couple of players, but they haven't been much over 20 years, much better than the Orioles have been since the Griffey A-Rod breakup.
Yeah, I think what's so interesting when you bring up the Mariners, and I think back to, what was it, last October when Jerry DiPoto, it was last fall. I can't remember where it was exactly, when it was exactly, but he kind of talked about their philosophy, and he made a comment that their goal for the long haul is basically to win, I think it was 54% of their games on an annual basis. And with that logic being, that's going to land you in the postseason semi-frequently, right? Pretty frequently, especially in the system of 3 wild cards and all that. And some years you're going to be a little bit better than that, some years worse. But, he kind of made that comment, and it's kind of it's the mindset of contending every year, not in the sense of we're trying to win 100 games in a regular season, but to just get in and roll the dice and basically do what Arizona did last year, right? To do what the Phillies did a couple years ago, right? When the Phillies, we think of them as this juggernaut now, but you think back to where they were when they fired Joe Girardi and they were struggling in late May, and Rob Thompson takes over, and they just, they played really good baseball the rest of the way. And I think they won 88 games that year, whatever it was. But Jerry DiPoto talked about this last fall, and it got a lot of negative publicity from the standpoint of, you're trying, but not trying your hardest. And it's kind of that whole mindset. But if you're Mike Elias or Jerry DiPoto, or it's kind of funny to bring this up because most GMs are analytically inclined now, but you kind of think about it through the lens of win probability and just giving yourself a chance every year, giving yourself a chance to roll the dice, getting to the table when you're going to roll the dice. And that's kind of how the Mariners are proceeded. They don't spend a ton of money, although they've given out some big contracts over the years. And this year's a perfect example. You look at that team, if they're able to hold off the Astros, them compelling. At the same time, their offense is so bad that you feel like, okay, they might be able to hold the Orioles to 3 runs in a postseason series, or hold the Yankees to 3 runs in a postseason series in a game, but they may only score 1 or 2, even if they're not going up against the stud pitcher, because their offense is that inept. So, they're an imperfect team, but they're a team built with the mindset of DePoto's talked about this. They want to be decent enough every year to give themselves a chance to get in the postseason, and then they'll see if they're this year's Diamondbacks or this year's Rangers or whatever. So I'm not saying that that's the best way to try to win.
Well, I was going to say, I was going to
it is a
interject
model.
as we've done an hour on trades here this week during the holiday, and the Orioles playing in the middle of the night, and whether they're going to fleece their minor league system and how far is too far to be in. Dude, they're in the playoffs already.
Yeah.
The Orioles are in the playoffs already,
Right.
kind of sort of in their mind. So they don't really have to do anything. And part of that is we did give ourselves a chance to win. We have Corbin Burns. That is our chance to win. That we don't need to have two of them this year to deplete ourselves 3 years from now when we have to pay Rutschman $40 million and Henderson $50 million. And maybe Rodriguez is getting $28 million in arbitration. Who knows, right? Like, that they would say, well, we better win. No, we just better play in October. We play in October, it'll be good enough. I don't know, man. The Ravens haven't really eaten on that. And the NFL is a little different with salary cap and different things like that. But this is sort of an unlimited time for a 74-year-old owner who clearly is getting his rocks off dancing on the dugout and hanging out with Joan Jett and like all this stuff. That winning and loading up and the urgency. I'm going to write that word down. Urgency. I got to get that in my notes. Where is the level of urgency? And I don't know. It's still very nascent and new and young for the owner, for the team, young guys. If they go get their ass kicked and get wiped out after winning 104 games and beating the Yankees, even with as comprised, you would say, what was a good year and we'll try harder next year. I mean, look, man, we're in Baltimore. We are, especially on a baseball side. I'm not even talking about The Wire or anything you see on Fox 45 or Schooling or any of that. We are, as Oriole fans, and I don't say Ravens fans, but as Orioles fans, we're used to sort of settling for less and trying to do more with less. And like, that's an easy thing to pitch. And in Seattle, where they haven't won anything, that's an easy thing to pitch. They can't pitch that in LA and sell club seats at Dodger Stadium, right? I mean, Artie Moreno's got that problem out there with Trout and having lost Ohtani and all of that all the allures off. The Mets and the Yankees are always fighting for who's got the brighter, shinier object to get attention. The Orioles have everybody's attention here. And to your point, look, Angelos is dead. We got a new owner. They got all these young players. They're in first place. It's already a gift. They don't have to win the World Series. They just it's already fun. You can make that case. It's a lot more fun than it's ever been. I'll make that case right now.
Yeah. But you also just mentioned the Yankees, the Mets, and the Dodgers. The Dodgers have a World Series in the weird 2020 abbreviated bizarro baseball season. All the other regular season success and all the money they've spent, they haven't won any other World Series. The Yankees haven't won a World Series since 2009. The Mets, I mean, my goodness, it's almost been as long for the Mets as it's been the Orioles. Now they've gotten to a couple World Series. They've gotten to a World Series, but a couple of them. But again, you can do all those things and still not get there. And this kind of goes back to what I was saying about Jerry DePoto and what the Mariners have done. And I'm not saying that that's the right way to do it. Let me be clear about that. I'm not trying to celebrate that. I'm trying to throw out there different ways of roster building. That's why.
Well, that's what they would say if they don't make a deal. They'd say, we're not giving away Norby and Jackson. I mean, that's all Elias had to say last year was they wanted Holiday. All right, end of story. And if he leaks that to the media and that becomes a story, and we're not giving Holiday up, then nobody's pissed off that they didn't deal for DCs. You know what I mean? So, like, It's real easy. And these guys like to play PR, as you find out on the inside, and I find out on the outside, that whatever they say it is what they're going to say it is, which is why they're not saying we're going all in and all that, because I went through this with Orlando Brown and getting his lawn cut. Everybody already perceives that they could do more with their farm system than anybody else in baseball can do. And the answer to that would be Jerry DePoto and Sig Mejdal, who reads cards for a living, would tell you, and tell Mr. Rubenstein, who's a money guy, we're already all in. We're in the playoffs. We have Corbin Burns. We have Grayson Rodriguez. These are the good times. We don't need to give away 2026's starting lineup in order to do this. And look, man, McPhail told the old man before Flanagan passed, why feed him steak when they'll eat hamburger? Right now, they're sort of feeding them hamburger that smells like filet mignon. Like because they're paying for hamburger and they're getting filet mignon. Or they're getting Chateaubriand. Actually, they're getting Kobe, prime. Like literally when you're winning 101 games and doing it on $40 million of payroll, ownership would say, why do we need Verlander or Scherzer? And why do we need to make Corbin Burns the highest paid pitcher in the land? And there's a lot of restriction of salary in baseball. And I would never, ever think they all get together and have a book on these sort of things. But part of the book of Steve Bisciotti was, we don't give quarterbacks guaranteed contracts here. Part of the book for some of these owners is, we're small market. We can't afford, and we're just going to do it this way and sell it. And that's part of DePoto selling to his fan base in Seattle. Like, we've been around 50 years. We sell as many tickets as we open the door to Asia. And we're not rich yet. And we're not that team making that kind of money. That it's an easy way to sort of lower the expectations to say we're never going to spend like the Dodgers or the Yankees. And because of that, we have to do it on the cheap. And because of that, we're not giving Jackson Holiday, pick a name, we're not giving that guy away this month.
Yeah, and look, I mean, this is also why when you expand the playoff field, the cynics out there say, well, now you're, as much as you're trying to sell it, you're trying to sell this bill of goods that, oh, well, more people will be are incentivized to try to make the playoffs because there are 3 wild cards now. No, it can be the exact opposite where you say, why am I going to have a $200 million payroll if 85 wins probably gives me a really good shot to be that 3rd wild card? And we've seen it. Arizona was a wild card last year. Texas was a wild card last year. The Phillies were a wild card the year before that and got to the World Series. So again, these arguments can go
none of them
one way
smell
or the other.
nearly as good as the Orioles do on the 4th of July.
Right. And that's the whole point.
Right.
Like you look at this, and that's where, for me, again, it's the middle ground. Yeah, they're going to add pitching. And yes, I want them to add pitching. Yes, they need to add pitching. But again, what exactly are you going to add? What is available? What are you willing to give up? There is a middle ground there. And Mike Elias, we've seen this over and over now. We should at least know this much. I don't know where David Rubenstein is in terms of what he sees for the payroll and where it's going to go in the coming years. But what we should know about Mike Elias at this point in time is that he is not going to completely neglect the future, right? I mean, we saw this 2 years ago when mathematically they did have a chance to be a wild card team in 22, but they saw a good opportunity to deal Trey Mancini, and the return on that was good. And there's still some, when you look at someone like a McDermott in their system who might help them at some point in time, albeit maybe as a bullpen guy, but they did that. They did Jorge. They traded
Jorge
Mountcastle
as the better player over the next 36 months, and he was.
Yeah, but absolutely.
And they didn't even see O'Hearn coming across over the hill.
Right, on a cash buy. And Ryan O'Hearn, by the way, you brought him up. I want to give him 5 seconds of love. All-star finalist, and cool for him. I mean, what a great story Ryan O'Hearn has been.
And he's a good human, right? Like, he's a guy.
He
is. That's the whole thing about me being locked out. And he's one of the first guys, if I had a press credential, I would go back in and say, I hear you're a good guy. My name's Nestor. Nice to meet you. I hear you're a good guy.
It's a good story. I mean, this was a guy who, for years, it did not work out in Kansas City for him. And basically given away. The Orioles at one point outright.
Those guys are the most humble. The Jamie Moyers, in my experience through sports, the guys that tried hard and barely made it or get there, like this kid that's 31, the Reds 34 on the Red Sox or whatever. Mm-hmm. There's a humility and failure in baseball that when you're a number one and you don't make it, you're a different person. I find that because baseball's hard, man. It's so hard.
It is. I mean, it's a sport of failure. I mean, that's why I was saying a week ago when the Orioles were losing 5 straight, I was saying, guys, this happens. I mean, I heard more than a couple players this past week even make use the analogy of it's no different than when you're a hitter and you'll go through a stretch where you will absolutely sting the ball, but it's going right to a defender, and your result is nothing, but you know your process was good. And on the flip side, you'll bloop a few balls in where you did not make good contact whatsoever. You don't really feel that good about your process. And what happens? It finds grass in the outfield.
Cheap
It's
hit.
no, it's no different for a baseball team. Again, over 162. And that's why I said the key for the Orioles in that stretch, and we'll see, they've won 4 of 5 since then, was not turning a 5-game losing streak into a 6-14 3-week stretch. That's where that becomes a problem. You drop 5 in a row in 162, that's barely a blip on the radar. But if you have a bad 3 weeks that stems from that, then that's a different story. So, but going back to the point I was making with Mike Elias and the big picture, we saw this. They dealt Mancini. They dealt Jorge Lopez, who I said it at the time. I didn't love that deal. And part of that was Jorge Lopez had some club control left. But they got Yennier Cano, where he is presently, notwithstanding, still, you'd sign off on that based on what he gave them last year alone and where Jorge Lopez is at this point in his career 2 years later. So they got him, and they also got Cade Povich in that deal, who is a maybe. I'm not saying he's a long-term answer, but he's at least a maybe. So Elias at that point in time, now they're in a far different, Captain Obvious statement here. They're in a far different place now than they were even 2 years ago. But the point is, Elias isn't just going to have complete blinders on that 2024 World Series or bust. There's a middle ground here. And you've thrown out names. Jackson Holliday is not the same guy as Connor Norby, right? Kobe Mayo is not the same guy as Kyle Stowers, right? You have lots of assets in your farm system that you can trade, that guys that are either blocked or guys that are maybes or guys that are good prospects, but not legendary prospects. And legendary is not the right term, but we know Jackson Holliday is a really unique, really special prospect. And by the way, I'll throw this out there. A year ago at this time, Grayson Rodriguez was in the minor leagues. And we recall how important Grayson Rodriguez ended up being in the second half to the Orioles in their playoff run, and that he started game 2. So Jackson Holliday still has an opportunity to make a big impact on this year's team. Same thing goes for Kobe Mayo, even though it's a little more challenging figuring out.
By the way, Ortiz, 73 games, 251 at bats, 275 average. He's hit 7 home runs, 13 doubles.
He's been really good.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
There you go. Good.
That's a Major League Baseball player you gave away. Yeah. Right? I mean, literally, you gave a Major League Baseball player away.
And hey, but the Orioles got Corbin Burns, and Corbin Burns has done everything they could have reasonably expected. Look, with trades, I know we always look for the example where you fleece a team, but more often than not, you're perfectly fine with it working out with both sides. For one thing, that team might be more willing to work with you in the future if they feel good about the trade that they made with you. So there's always some of that. But look, even if Joey Ortiz had stayed, where was he going to play? Now, you could say, okay, well, Jackson Holliday has struggled, and Joey Ortiz would be starting maybe. And, you'd still have Westberg and Gunnar in the infield. But again, at that point in time, they thought Jackson Holliday would be their starting second baseman at this point. And a month from now, he still could be, right? So let's not jump to conclusions there. But again, it speaks to Joey Ortiz wasn't regarded as Jackson Holliday or Kobe Mayo. I mean, he was a top 100 prospect in, multiple publications, but wasn't like.
But given Holliday, Westberg, and Henderson, that's it. That's the end for the next 5 years.
Exactly. I mean, that's where, and that's where it's tough for like Connor Norby. You kind of, if he's going to stay in Baltimore, he's going to be a utility guy, right? We've talked about this. Mateo, 2 years ago, people thought, oh, maybe he'll be a starting shortstop, not a superstar, but Mateo now projects as a utility guy, and that's fine. You still need bench players. You still need useful pieces off the bench. So, they have pieces to make moves. At the same time, Mike Elias is still going to look at the big picture. He's not going to ignore that. I think we know that much now. I mean, we should. We all were here and watched 2019, 20, 21, and, the first couple months, really 22, even with the way they built their roster, they were looking at the big picture. So, we're going to see how it plays out. But I want to go back to Seattle for just a moment, because I even heard a few people throw this out there. Man, if there's actually if you want to talk about an off the beaten path, but actually kind of a logical trade partner, man, it would be the Orioles and the Mariners looking at their major league rosters right now, and then looking at at their respective systems. Man, if you're the Mariners, wouldn't it behoove you to trade some of your pitching for some offensive help? And if you're the Orioles, you would say, is there someone you could deal them where you could get some pitch? I doubt it'll happen because you rarely see deals like that where you would trade major leaguer for major leaguer between two contenders. But that's why I joked at the beginning of our segment where you kind of look at the Orioles offense and the Mariners pitching and looking at their starting pitching, you'd say, man, is there a trade to work out there? Because these two teams, I mean, you kind of look at it.
But would they look at
again,
Austin Hayes or Cedric Mullins or Ryan Mountcastle or any of these guys and say that guy's going to make our lineup this much better at this point? Because those would be the kind of major league players you're not projecting Connor Norby into their starting lineup, or even maybe Kobe Mayo next year for them. And, but
yeah,
they're going to be everybody's trying to get pitching. Even the teams with pitching are going to try to get pitching, I think.
well, they need offense though. I mean,
Okay,
again, go look. Their offense is terrible. Julio Rodriguez even has I looked at his numbers going into this series. I mean, Julio Rodriguez is slugging 327. His on base percentage is 297. I mean, this is supposed to be one of the bright young stars in the American League. And, he beat out Adley Rutschman for Rookie of the Year 2 years ago. And what's happened to him? And
if Adley Rutschman's hitting like that this time in 25, we got problems, right? We can't even perceive that even being possible at this point with Rutschman 2 years into this.
Well, just this offense in general. I mean, even the guys that have struggled, right? I mean, go look at Austin Hayes' numbers since he came back from the IL. Now, he's a fourth outfielder platoon type at this point. I think we all agree with that. But he's been much better with the bat. Cedric Mullins the last 2.5 weeks has been much better with the bat. Colton Cowser has looked better the last week or two. I mean, we've seen Heston Kjerstad had a huge weekend. The Grand Slam, we didn't even talk about it on Saturday night.
Every night there's a different star. That's the magic of Oriole baseball.
And more specifically, this is where I keep emphasizing to you, and I mean, I remember weeks back at Fadley's, I had the conversation with you about the Orioles and, the complaint that they're not walking enough. And, I'll hear that at times. Although Adley Rutschman's walked since we've had that conversation, his walk numbers have gone back up again. But this is where I keep reminding everyone, look around Major League Baseball. The Orioles offense in what has been such a depressed run scoring environment has been so good. It's not perfect. I'm not suggesting that, but their run scoring and their ability to slug and hit for power, and yes, home runs, but also doubles and triples, and they run the bases well. All the things we know they do. The pitching part of it aside for just a moment.
Yeah, if you're going to beat this team in October, you better bring some pitching in here.
Yeah, exactly. Because and that's where I keep, as we've danced around the whole October thing and pitching. Yes, they need to add more pitching, and I agree. But so much of their October fate is going to lie in who they already have, right? I mean, yes, in a perfect world, you're going to bring in a starting pitcher that's really going to move the needle for you and be that legit 2/3 kind of guy to go with Burns and Rodriguez. But
in the mind of the fans, we beat the Yankees and take a couple of days off. That's ideal, right? Right? I don't know if it's ideal or not, but ideally, we're going to bring in pitching to be a better team in August and September, to be one game or one half game, at least for this week, for the here and now, better than the Yankees, so that that would give you your best chance to win, right? I mean, Sig Mejdal the probability of that would be, that's our best chance, is to take a series off and escape to the next round. I guess. Yeah. I mean, that's theoretical. That we haven't even agreed on that yet, even though the math agrees on that, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think some recency bias definitely plays into that, because the most recent examples, Texas and Arizona, they were wild cards. The Phillies 2 years ago, they were a wild card. But I think over the long haul, you'd still rather avoid, even if you're playing at home, you'd still rather avoid a best of three. I mean, we talk about a best
of the Dodgers done?
Well, again, this also speaks to just October's unpredictable. It really is. I know that so many fans are so longing for a World Series and a deep October run, and I get that. I mean, I'm 40 years old. I've said it over and over. Look at my gray hair and my temples.
Dude, all I wanted was a competitive baseball team. Like, we skipped that. Yeah.
Right. But like the whole thing, like, I'm 40 years old, I'm going to be 41. That's how long it's been. That's since the Orioles won the World Series and all that. But boy, there's just so many variables at work here that you can be the best team on paper. The Dodgers have been that how many times over the last 8, 9 years? And they have won World Series in the weird COVID year where they opened up the postseason to what, 16 teams total or whatever it was. So, it's just, there's a lot of unpredictability. But going back to the Orioles offense, if they're going to make this deep run, yeah, they need to add some pitching. But I guarantee you, if we're in late October talking about the Orioles in the World Series, they probably hit the heck out of the ball. And yeah, Corbin Burns has been Corbin Burns, and Grayson Rodriguez has maybe looked like, hey, we might lose Corbin Burns in a couple weeks, but Grayson Rodriguez is looking more and more like maybe he's not Corbin Burns, but he could be a heck of a, you know, number two slash maybe lower end number one, whatever it is. But but the point is, they've got a lot going for them, and so much of it does pertain to their bats, and that's where I think it is interesting just to see how it's going to play out. And that's why I brought up to you, I think it was last week, when I said, when you're looking at these trades, don't completely dismiss the possibility of them trading a position player, a hitter from their major league roster, because part of that would also be to kind of clear the deck a little bit. I mean, I've said to you, I really do think the Orioles want to try to find a path to get Kobe Mayo to the major leagues. I mean, that's kid's got a serious bat. I mean, serious. Now, that might be that they ultimately trade him, or it might be that they trade, I don't know, Ryan Mountcastle, and I'm just throwing him out there, right? Because he's someone of consequence, whereas Austin Hayes is more of a reserve, number 4 outfielder kind of guy at this point in time, at least in terms of perception. But, that might be the move. And I'm not saying it's at the deadline, but it might be this winter, for example. So, the point is they have so many different possibilities here because you do have such a deep system, because you do have such a crowded major league roster in terms of, just how everyone gets playing time. I think I've talked about it since spring training. You and I have talked about it since spring training. What's this outfield going to look like the rest of the year? Right. I mean, Santander playing every day, hitting home runs. He's on pace for a 40 home run season. So he's in the lineup every day, whether it's in right field or DH. But everyone else, it's kind of like, okay, what's the matchup that night? How are guys feeling? Who needs a night off? Who's been hitting the ball the last week? Who's been scuffling the last week? I mean, you have, that it's a good problem to have, but it's a challenge nonetheless for Brandon Hyde to kind of get all these guys into the lineup and try to, you want to go with the hot hand, but you also don't want to bury anyone and have anyone sitting on the bench too long. So, we've seen that, with Stowers. We saw it with Kjerstad earlier this year. Since coming back, Kjerstad's been playing a little more regularly, and they've gotten a return. I mean, he hit the big grand slam on Saturday night. So, these are all good problems to have, but they're trying to sort this out. And there's the gains for 2024, but there's also the long haul in terms of trading the right guys, keeping the right guys, hoping that the prospects that you're really putting your highest hopes into figure it out and are the real deal. I mean, for every Adley Rutschman and Gunnar Henderson, there are a couple guys where the jury's still out, certainly, but of all the guys they've drafted, would we consider any of them a bust yet in terms of the Elias era? No, to me, it's TBD for Colton Cowser and all the different, Heston Kjerstad, and look,
The thing
one of
about
those
all
guys
these young
might be
guys
Dell,
with
one of those.
what they're doing at this point, that any of those guys could be a guy in October. I'm an old hockey head, but there was a guy named John Druce many years ago that led the Caps to an Eastern Conference final, who was a complete, like, Baltimore Skipjacks lifer kind of player who for 3 weeks scored 8 goals. And, like, I see Cowser, Kjerstad, Stowers, all of these guys as capable. I don't know if they'll be in the lineup because of Hayes and Mullins and experience and who's hitting the ball better and where the pitching matchups are. I mean, I believed in Cowser in April. I believed in Cano last May. I believe more in O'Hearn because I've seen a body of work and consistency than this Mountcastle. I'm going to be Dave Kingman 1 month and be Dave Kingman another month in a different way, right? I don't. I believe in the bats of all of these guys. I don't know that I really believe in a lot of the arms, right? Like, I don't know that I'm loving Cole Irvin to be the guy that stands up and gives me 6 in
Yeah.
October in game 3. I like the chances of Mountcastle hitting 3 bombs more. So I'm with you all along that any of these players have shown, any of them, they've all been stars. They've all had their helmets off. They've all hit big home runs. They've all drank from the hose in the dugout. We know what they all look like. I'm a believer in the offense. I mean, I really am. And
Yeah.
I would concur with you that they could win a World Series just based on muscling up in October in general, and that their pitching could be okay. I mean, the pitching in 2014 was okay. I love Miguel Gonzalez. I loved Wei In Chen. I'm sorry to let him. Some of these guys get away and not pay them. Not to mention Scope. I was really wrong on Scope. I want to say that a decade later. So were you. We were all wrong on that. But I mean, I remember how we did it back then. I remember where we were last year. I don't know. Like Rodriguez and Burns, to your point, it's already a massive upgrade over what they went into last October with.
Yeah. Well, and it's not even that it's a massive upgrade, but because I mean, Kyle Bradish was great last year, and Grayson Rodriguez was really good the second half of last year. Now, Burns is an upgrade over Bradish. I don't think it's necessarily dramatic because Kyle Bradish over the last year and a half, and obviously now he's hurt, so it's a moot point. It was excellent. He really was. But yes, Corbin Burns has more experience, has a longer track record. And now you're hoping Grayson Rodriguez, year 2 compared to year 1, and he was really good second half of year 1. Your hope, and he has that experience now. Now, it wasn't a good experience when he got knocked around in game 2 of the division series, but you're hoping he's better for that in the same way that, you made him mention in a conversation where Eddie Murray in 79, but then Eddie Murray had, he had his vindication in game 5 of 83 when he hits 2 home runs at the vet and all that. So, I mean, you're always going to have some of that, but yeah, this team was built on its position player talent. We know that it's been very deliberate. We talked about it year after year after year. I mean, drafting college hitters and then mixing in a Gunnar Henderson and developing him, right? And drafting Jackson Holiday 1-1 out of high school, but knowing he was that much of a special talent and seeing him ascend. And now, we need to see it at the major league level, but we will, presumably, because that's how many people believe in him at this point in time and still do, even with his rough April that he had with his cup of coffee in the majors. But that's where, again, at what point do you use more of this talent to go get what you need? And you mentioned 2014, the Orioles definitely on paper, you look at Corbin Burns and Grayson Rodriguez alone, looks better than what they had in 14. Although those guys, especially the second half of that season, their starting rotation did a heck of a job for them. But what was the strength of that team on the pitching side? It was their bullpen. I've joked with you, I've joked with people all year. It's like, man, if you could just go back in time, if you had the time machine and you could drop the 2014 Orioles bullpen onto this roster, that's all she wrote. Like, I wouldn't even be worried about adding another starter. I mean, like, sure, you could add another one, but the bullpen with this offense,
I'd prefer the Royals, but that's okay. I mean,
fair enough. Well, I'm using it right. Sure. I mean, yeah, with them, with what? Wade Davis, Kelvin Herrera, and I can't even remember who was the actual closer for that team. I'm drawing a blank. But the point was they had Herrera and Wade Davis just to get to their closer, and they were that good in the pen. But that's why I've continued to say with the Orioles, add a starter. I'm wholeheartedly agree. There's no debating that anymore, especially after
Holland.
Yeah.
There you go. Sorry.
But that's the thing. Like their 7th and 8th inning guys were so good that I forgot about their closer that year. And he was excellent too. But that's where I look at this and say, yeah, they need another starter, but boy, they need a couple. Give me a couple, one really high leverage arm and another really good arm, at least a guy that, give me an 8th, 9th inning guy and give me a 7th/8th inning guy, in terms of the pecking order. And then what that means.
Hold on here. Holland, 144, 65 games, 62 innings. Wade Davis, ERA 1.0. 0-0.
He was insane.
71 games, 72 innings. Herrera 141, 70 games, 70 innings. So 70, 72, and 60 sounds like 200 innings flat out of the bullpen in an average of 68 games. And that's every 2.5 days they were in
Yep.
there, right? And ERA baked in at about 1.2, all in. For
Better
200 innings of relief pitching of an ERA of 1. Insanity. No one will come close to that.
you better be winning in the sixth inning. I mean, that's what we said, right? And that's why I made the comparison, and that's why Cleveland, and we talked about the Guardians plenty last week. That's why Cleveland's so dangerous. That bullpen, I'm not putting it on the Kansas City level, but go look at those numbers, and we saw it. If the Orioles were trailing, we saw it the first couple games of the series. If Orioles were trailing in the late innings, that's about all she wrote. I mean, that's just how it is. So yeah, I mean, to bring it back full circle, Orioles, we'll see what's going to happen with the trade deadline, but I love the offense. I'll continue to say that. And no, they don't hit too many home runs. Go look at teams that have won in October, by the way. They've hit home runs. Go look at what the Rangers did offensively last October. They hit home runs. They hit the ball. So no matter who the Orioles acquire on the pitching side here over the next month, because we're here, it's trade deadline month. We've talked about it a lot for 2 months, but the month's finally here. But so much of it is still going to hinge on, does Gunnar Henderson look like an MVP? Does Adley Rutschman look like the all-star catcher that he is? What's O'Hearn and Mountcastle look like? What does Anthony Santander look like? Does Jackson Holiday factor in? Jordan West, go down the list.
Do they hit with runners in scoring position?
Yeah, I mean, you got to do what you do best, right? That's why we've talked about it with the Ravens for the last couple years. Lamar, 2-time MVP. He needs to look like it in January for them to break through, right? I mean, that's a singular player, but baseball is more of the, you need everyone to contribute because you can't have the same guy bat over and over and over. So, they're in a really good spot. That's the point I keep trying to stress. Yes, we focus on the pitching and there's so much angst over that, but this team's in a really good spot. I mean, they're in first place. They're 22 over 500. Even after their 5-game losing streak, the Yankees have really come back to earth as well. It's a reminder, it's a long season, so we're going to see how it plays out, but I'll still take my chances with this lineup against anyone on a night-by-night basis. It's just a matter of, can you fortify the pitching? And they've got the resources to do it. We're just going to see how it plays out.
How much should I offer for this Oilers Derrick Henry jersey? What do you think? I mean, it's at $49.99. I made a $20 offer. I think I insulted the person. It is really nice. I mean, but it's a large. I mean, a modern large would be too big for me, right? I mean, I have to put something underneath of it or whatever. But I'm looking at it. It says "Love You Blue" right on it. That should get another $5 just for that. It's got the NFL shield on it. That's $5 more. Money goes to the Adams family, which is not that the other Adams family, not the creepy and the other Adams family. They're kind of kooky too in Nashville. So I don't know. I'm trying to get into the football spirit here at the 4th of July. Hot dogs, hamburgers, lots of friends, crabs and beer and crab cakes and friends for the 4th of July. I had a great weekend celebrating with our friends at Heritage Fair. Hope everybody's safe during the 4th of July, staying up late with the Orioles. Luke and I will be gathering next Friday, the 12th. The Yankees are coming to town. Don't tell anybody, but get downtown for that nice and early, and enjoy your 4th responsibly with family. Please don't do anything stupid with fireworks. It worries the hell out of me about all that kind of stuff, and we'll see you on the other side. I'm Nestor. He's Luke. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Orioles baseball. Baltimore positive and staying up late on the West Coast.